Hey my friend, it's Duc Tran. In this training, let's talk about Alamofire. As you may know, Alamofire is one of the world's most popular framework for iOS developers. It is used by literally Facebook or Instagram and Spotify. When you go into the third-party libraries of those apps that I just mentioned, they actually put attributes thanks to Alamofire. It is the world's most popular networking framework for iOS developers. So let's talk about that, and because I received a lot of questions about that from you guys on the channel and you guys send my request. So let's talk about that. In this training, we are going to build a weather forecast app using Alamofire. Now, if you may know, if we write our own networking code, it will take like a few hundred lines of code. Alamofire, it just takes one line of code. But the problem is, the hard thing is, how can you structure your model data so that you take the data from Alamofire, downloading data from the web, and then you translate that data into JSON. You parse that data into JSON. And how can you turn that JSON into your foundation object and use that in your app? That is all the things that we will talk about in this training. So step number one, what I want you to do is click the link on this page or goes in the link in the description, download your starter project. There I have you on the resources for this course in this training, and then you will also be able to access to another workshop that I did for free for you. It's called How to Build and Design Nike e-commerce store without having to hire a $10,000 designer. That is an amazing training. I hope that you enjoy that. So just click the link right on this post and download the resources for this training and get access to that Nike e-commerce training as well. So let's dive right into our demo. Alright my friend, open up your starter project and let's get started. This is how the starter project looks like at this stage. I just have your UI, a simple UI for us to focus on the networking side of the project, the Alamofire side of the project. And then later on, we'll expand the app using other factors in the API that we're going to use, okay? So the next one is, let's have a look at the asset.exe asset. We have a bunch of icons here for you if you want to use the icons in your weather app. We have things like these things, clear day, which is kind of like sunny. We have clear night, just the moon. We have the cloudy, all of those things that we can find in a weather app. So let's get ahead into step number one, in which we are going to create a model class that is going to model the current weather. So the current weather, in this case, we just need some pieces of information like the temperature, the humidity, the how about the summary of the day, which is like cloudy, or all of those things. So let's right click into this, create a new file, and then we'll have a script file. Let's have a script file over here, and let's put it right here. And this guy, let me call this guy current weather. You can call that anything. I just want to call that current weather. Keep it simple and create. Awesome. Here we go. So what is this guy? Let's make some space. This guy is going to model our current weather because it is just a simple model class. We don't need UI kit. Let's just have import foundation and then a class called current weather like this. And this current weather, we have a let temperature, which is an integer, right? And then let humidity, which is an integer, and then let Precip probability, which is probability, which is like how likely it is going to rain or snow, an integer, and then let summary, which is a string optional. Now, why are we using optional typed all of the place here? Why is it we just use optional typed? The reason for that is we have to take care of the case that this thing can be nil. Because now if we use some static data, then we can set that anything that we want. But here we're talking about we fetch data. We are going to fetch data from the web. So it means that there may be a case that the web, there's some problem with internet connection, or the data from our server is not good, then, or it is not available, then it is going to be nil. That's why we have to have optional over here, right? Now this thing is going to tell us that these stored property will have the initializer, doesn't have the initializer, and it is all constants. That's why it will be all nil, right? So we'll talk about that. Let's just leave it right there. The reason why I want all of these to be let, so that no one can set these guys, right? We'll set that once in our initializer, and that's it. Because the weather, we don't want anyone to set this thing. We just want to have to use that thing, right? Next thing, let's have an initializer that is going to take care of the case that when we have some data from the web. Well, we keep saying about data from the web. What is that? Well, to do that, let's head over our browser right here, and all you have to do is go into developer.forecast.io, press enter, and then you will see this page right here. This page is the API, which stands for Application Programming Interface. Now, Application Programming Interface, all it means is that it is a bunch of methods and functions that someone is already wrote the code for you. In this case, it is Dark Sky, the company that is doing weather applications, and they already have the API for us to use, right? Just like the same for Foundation. Foundation has things like classes, array, or things like methods with string or arrays that you use, things like numbers, the append. That is also API. The append method is one of the methods in the collection API of Foundation, of the Foundation framework. Make sense? All right. Now, if you don't have an account yet, sign up. It is free. And then once you sign up, you will go into a console, something like this. It gives you your secret key, which is kind of like your ID with this service, right? This service is going to have a lot of developers who are going to use their service. So that's why they need you to use this key, so that they know that every time you make a network call, which is like you use this URL right here to call some data from the web, or we call that a request, right? When we make a network call, they know that you are that developer who is calling the data, who is requesting the data. And because to run the servers, it takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of resources, and it takes a lot of financial, also human resources, they are going to charge you if you have like more than 1,000 calls a day. Okay, so if you want to build some weather app, then consider about that. It's I think it's not very expensive, but that is basically all APIs. Now, let's keep it that way. And then if you see this API over here, we'll talk about that in just a moment. Let's copy this URL that we have over here, goes into the next tab, and I'm going to paste this guy over there. And boom, you see that it was having a bunch of things. So let me click view source here. Oh, I cannot do that. Okay, let me open up Safari. I don't have this thing in Safari, so here we go, Safari. I think my Safari is having some problem ever since I update the new OS. Here we go. So when you copy paste that URL that we have in the browser, you see that it has a bunch of data, right? These crypted text, it doesn't make any sense, right? So now when you go back here, you see the API usage. Remember that I just copy paste these things into once this browser and then once this guy, and then a few times before I test this API, and you see that we have the total calls this month is 2 because I test this API twice before I record this training. And now if I refresh this thing, it has 4 calls. And now let's refresh this page once again and refresh this. It has 5, and today is 3. It means that we just make some call, some API call, or some network request to this server, to this API, Dark Sky API. All right, so that we'll talk about that later in the training. Now, let's focus on these data. This is what we call JSON. It stands for JavaScript Object Notation. Okay, so here we go. Let's make a comment here. This is JSON format, which stands for JavaScript Object Notation. Why is it called that way? It's because these data is actually in JavaScript, which is a language that we use for web applications or front-end web development. And literally an object is just like a class like this. And the way that we write JavaScript classes or object is basically like this. Now, these thing doesn't look pretty. That's why if you copy paste this thing into some services like let's call pretty JSON. Okay, so just Google pretty JSON, and then we'll have you this JSON formatter and click into that. There's a lot of things, and then if you copy paste this whole thing, paste that over here, process this guy, and boom, you see that it says valid JSON, all of these things. Now, if you are using Chrome like this, you will have some extensions, things like you can see like JSON formatter, or let me see what is the thing that I'm using. This thing, right? It's called JSON View. So just go into the Chrome extension. There's a lot of these things. So now, let's have a look at this guy. This guy, it's basically an object containing some string. All of these is just string and numbers. And if you look at further, this thing, it's actually in script. It is just a dictionary, a big giant dictionary. This is a dictionary. And it means that you can use this thing into your iOS app, or you can use that in your web app, or you can use that in your Android app. That's why it is multi-platform. It doesn't rely on any platform. It's just everywhere. And then if you look at this thing, because this is a dictionary, that's why it has key value pairs, right? Key value pairs. Now it has the key is latitude in here, and then it has some values, longitude, this thing, which is the location of, which is here we use Los Angeles. And then we have the offset. We have currently, if you look at the documentation, we have the documentation over here, and you can read that further. But the currently key over here contains another dictionary. This dictionary is the data for our current weather, right? So the currently here is the current weather that we want to do. So now, if we want to access to these data and we want to access the current weather, we have to get this data somehow in our iOS app. And then from that, we assume that we get this whole big giant dictionary, right? Now, what we want to do is we want to access this key value pair to have the currently. We access the currently, and then we have this dictionary. And that is our current weather, right? So now from our current weather, we can access these key value pair. Summary is the summary. We have the icons, which is for our icon here, right? And if you look at the icon, it's this partly cloudy day. And if you look at the assets.exe asset, and you see that there will be a partly cloudy day, which is the icon that I just intentionally named those for you. Cool? And then you have like the temperature, which is 57.24. That's pretty cold. Yeah, in Los Angeles. And then we have those information, right? Now, we'll talk more about this when we actually do some network call, and then we'll talk more about that. But here, let's talk about the case that we have only this dictionary for us to use, right? So imagine that if we only have this dictionary right here, for us to parse this dictionary into our app. Right, so here, this is our dictionary. Somehow, imagine that we have this dictionary. Imagine that we have this dictionary, which is the data of the current weather, and our job is we have to parse this dictionary, put those data into our properties over here, right? So that is the job. Now, I know that later on we want to have some icons, so let's have the icon, which is a string like this. Cool? So now over here, let's have an initializer, an initializer, which is an init like this, and we get from the weather dictionary. The type of a dictionary in Swift is a string to any, which is what we want, right? A string to any is because it can be an integer, it can be a double, it can be another dictionary, it can be a string. That's why it is string to any. Next up, now imagine or just assume that this weather dictionary is this whole thing. This is a dictionary. This is the weather dictionary that we want to parse. Our job is to put these values from those keys into these properties. How can we do that? Yeah, can you guess? Can you guess? Alright, so it's just that we access this key and we cast those down into appropriate data tag, and then we assign to these guys, right? So can you try like for 3 minutes and then 3 minutes? Yeah, 3 minutes. Access those values and then try, just pause the video, a little code challenge for you, and then assign these values into these properties and come back to me in just 3 minutes or 5 minutes, and then we will do it together. Okay, so do it now. Alright, did you do it? So this is your last chance. Do it now, and then we'll do it together. Alright, so here we go. Let me do this. Now before we do that, before we actually access these values, if you look at these keys, right? These keys are all string. So let me just be a good developer here, and I want to have a struct called weather keys. And these will contain all the keys in our APIs like this, so that later on, if like we, for example, we this API they changes their key, they change their keys, then we just have to change our keys in this struct, right? Because later on, if you want to use like this current weather in a lot of places, there you use these keys in a lot of places, not only this init method but other functions, other methods. Then if they change the key, you're going to have to change the key in a lot of places. That is not good programming practices. So that's why let's have some static. Let temperature, which is temperature, right? Which is a string for our, if you look at the key here, temperature. So copy this guy, paste it over here, and then static let humidity equals to, so let's look at over here, we have humidity like this. Here we go. Next thing we have Precip probability, static let equals to, I know that this is exactly like this, so I'm going to copy paste, and then static let summary is the string summary, and then static icon, which is this guy, right? Now again, the reason why we need that is because we want to implement good practice, and later on, if they change these keys, we don't have to, we only have to change it in one place. Cool. Now let's have some data into here. So temperature, number one, is our weather dictionary at the weather keys dot temperature. All right. Now because this is a string to any dictionary, that's why when we access this key, it is going to be an any optional. That's why we have to cast it out as an integer. And then let's have the humidity. So if let humidity like this double, I'm going to access the value and we cast that as a double. So let humidity double, which is our weather dictionary at the weather keys dot humidity, and we cast it as a double optional like this. But because this thing over here, what is that? Humidity. Oh, here we go. This thing, it is an integer, right? Because we want to have like the normal people when they use the app, they just want to know, hey, how humid, how's it today, right? Is it humid or not? They just want to know like 75% or 99% in Vietnam or like 12% here in Los Angeles. So those kind of information. They don't want to know like 12.1272% of those kind of things, right? We just need like 12%. That's why let's turn this double into an integer. How can we do that? Well, firstly, we have to cast it as surely a double. So if let over here, and then we got the humidity equals an integer with the humidity double times 100. So when we do that, it will round up this integer. And then, round down. And then humidity, if it is the case of else here, it means that this thing is nil. Then here we just have that nil. Cool? Let's do the same for our Precip double. So if let Precip double equals to weather dictionary at weather keys dot what's that, Precip? So right, Precip as a double. Now this thing means that how likely it is going to rain. So here Precip probability is an integer. Precip probability, oh no, this is Precip double times 100, else Precip probability equals nil. Right? So last thing, nearly last, summary equals weather dictionary at weather keys dot summary as a string, and finally our icon. So icon equals weather dictionary at weather keys dot icon as a string. Alright, now it seems like a lot of work, but that's it, nothing else. So that's pretty cool. Alright, so we just have the current weather with some properties. We have the keys for our API. We assume that we have the data, so we have a convenience initializer like this. Let's move on into step number 2 of our app. We are going to create a ForecastService object that is going to allow us to download the data from our forecast.io server. Right? So we have the API over here, calling it our server. Now we want to have that object that allows us to use this URL over here, one single URL that we can download data from the web. So let's go back into Xcode, right click over here, create a new file, script file, and then let's call this guy ForecastService, like this, ForecastService, put it over here, create this guy, boom, pretty good. Alright, now let's have this class called class ForecastService, like this, and let me make some space for us to work on. Here we go. Now what does this thing have? Well, there's only one thing that two things that we need. Number one, we need the API key. Remember this guy, the API key, because if you dissect or if you deconstruct this API call, this URL over here, you see that this guy over here, up until HTTPS, which is a secured URL, that's great. And then we have api.darksky.net/forecast. That is what we called the base URL. This is the base URL. And then this over here is what we called the secret key, right? The secret key, this is what it is. And then the left of the equation or the URL is the latitude and then the longitude, right? The latitude and the longitude, right? Makes sense? Okay, so now here, let's have the forecast API key. Forecast API key, which is a string. And then we have forecast base URL, which is a URL. And because it is a URL, it can be broken. So let me have optional. The API key will require them to have that. So it has to be a string. Cool. Let me make some comments here. Sample URL. All right. Now let's have an init for this forecast service. We only need an API key with a string. So we just do self.forecast API key equals API key. And finally, we have to construct this forecast base URL. So the base URL will have this forecast. So I'm going to copy paste this guy. Here we go. Copy paste this. And we just have to insert. This API key. So let's have forecast base URL equals a URL with a string this string, right? And then we insert this API key. Now, how can we do this? Yeah, we just use string interpolation. Here we go. Backward slash, open and close, paren, and then API key. Alright, so we are going to use a string here, and inside this string is we use string interpolation. So this string interpolation, let's have the first one is our base URL, forecast base URL, right? The next thing, we need a backslash, right? So this base URL is up until this guy over here. So we need the backslash, and then the latitude and the longitude separated by a comma. So backslash, and then the latitude, right? So over here, string interpolation again. Be careful with the forward slash and backslash and all those things. So the backslash, we have the latitude, and then comma, and then string interpolation again, like this. And finally, we have the longitude. Cool. All right, that's pretty good. Next, now we need the data. We have the URL. We need a mechanism, or we need somehow that we can download data from the web. How can we do that? Well, there are actually several ways. There are ways in iOS. One way you can do that is using Grand Central Dispatch. One way you can do that is using URLSession group of methods, right? In this course, I want to introduce you to a third-party library that is, I believe, I really think that is the most famous and like popular, widely used in the industry. It is used by apps like Facebook or Instagram. Everyone uses that in production app, and that is what we call Alamofire. Alamofire. Okay, and it is spelled like this, Alamofire. Okay, I really believe that in the title of the course you see that. Now, the way that we can use Alamofire is that we are going to use CocoaPods. But before we do that, I want to pause and say to you that this thing is, by all means, it is just kind of like a helper group or helper interface that allows you to not have to write boilerplate code or boring code. Right? But if you really want to understand what is underneath that, check out another training we have for you like we do this weather app, but we use URLSession or URLRequest, those kind of things that is really underneath the Alamofire. So this thing is just like kind of like a helper way for you to do this easier, to do this so that you don't have to write those boring code. But if you want to train to become an iOS developer that you understands those networking code, then really pay the time and put the time and just learn URLSession. Okay, so now having said all that, let's close this project because we are going to install CocoaPods. Here we go. Let me open up where's my folder. Here we go. This is the folder, and then we have the complete project. Here we go. This is a complete project, right? All right. So I'm going to open up terminal like this. Terminal. Let me increase the font. So this is terminal. Now, if you don't have CocoaPods, then all you have to do is typing in your terminal these line of code over here. So the first one, just typing in sudo gem install CocoaPods, and then it will say to you, and then if it is successful, great. If it is not, it will very much likely ask you to install active support, then just typing in this line of code. Cool? Alright, so I assume that you already have that. Let's move on and have our CocoaPods install for our app. So I'm going to cd, meaning that we want to change directory, meaning like just like the folder that we are in the terminal. So I'm going to drag out this icon here, just hold it a little bit, drag it to the screen, and you see the URL of our folder. Press enter, and then we do a pod init, meaning we want to initialize a pod file inside our directory over here. So press enter like this. That's good. And now if you go back into our folder, we have the pod file. Cool. So now let me open up this guy. Just drag this pod file into our Xcode icon so that we can edit this. Here we go. And look at this. What is the information that we have over here? It says, uncomment the next line to define a global platform for your project. That's good. So it means that, hey, I want to use platform iOS and from 9.0 and up. That's good. So let's delete this pound sign. It is the comment in a shell environment. And then here we have the target Alamofire, whether that is the name of our project, the name of the target. And then this says, if you are using script, delete that line and use frameworks over here. This means that, hey, we are using script, please. Cool? Now, below here, all we have to do is we're typing in part Alamofire like this. This thing will allow us to install the part, which is a framework called Alamofire. Cool? So let's close this, guys. Remember, we have to save that first. And then here, typing in part install in your terminal. Part install, press enter. Oh, in part file, initialize constant. Let me see. Oh, I think there's some problem with the part file. So let me go back here. Platform, target. Let me delete this guy. Part Alamofire. That's good. Save that thing. Do an part install. Invalid part file. Initialize constant part file. Alright. So this thing, it means that there is some syntax error in our part file, and it points out the line of code over here, and it says part Alamofire, which is the line that we just insert in. So we have to change that. Here we go. Goes into part file like this, and you said that this thing, it is the error, right? And the error is that we need a single quote like this. And then let's do clear part install again. Press enter, and it's downloading all the dependencies, and everything is good to go. See that? All right. So if you have any problem, just Google that or put the comment right below this video for me. Here we go. So now it says that it is successful. The part installation complete. There's one dependency from part file, those kind of things. And it says, please close any current Xcode sessions and then use the Alamofire weather.exe workspace for this project from now on. So here, go back into your project and you see this white icon. And this is a workspace. So open up this guy. Here we go. And then let me change to iPhone 7. We have this thing. Everything is the same. And let's build this thing to make sure that all the dependencies are running. And then ForecastService. All right. Cool. So next up, let's work on our ForecastService. Recall we have the forecast URL, right? The forecast URL. Now we will call the Alamofire method to download the data from the web. So first up, let's import Alamofire like this. And then below here, again, this is import Alamofire. Cool. Below here, let's have, oh, by the way, this thing is forecast URL. It is a URL optional. So here I'm going to use if let. So if we do have the URL, let's use Alamofire dot fetch. Alamofire dot request like this. It says data request with a URL. So URL, yeah, we do got that URL. So forecast URL like that, right? And then I want to call immediately that we want to have the response JSON, which is another method from the request from URL from Alamofire. It says response JSON. Remember JSON? It stands for JavaScript. What? Object notation. And then it says completion handler like this. So press enter. So this thing, press enter. And what we have over here is a data response. So let me have the response here, and we delete the code. Now, inside this is what we call a closure. Why is it a closure? A closure, if you don't know about that, if a closure, it all means is that it's like it is a function that you can pass around as a variable or an instance. In Swift, you can do that. Or if you know about JavaScript, you can do that too. So the way we do this is that this thing, it goes off to the internet. This Alamofire.request, it goes off to the internet to this exact URL, and then it will download the data from our forecast.io. Now, the process of downloading data, it requires some time. It takes some time to download the data, right? That's why it will not be a direct, it will not be like a straight line like this. It will take some time to download this thing. And because the app that we are doing, most of the time when we use the app, it will just like very responsive. If the user click onto the button just responds. If you use tail view, you can scroll up and down. There will be no lag virtually, right? So this means is that it will not interfere our UI. And what it does is that it will get off what we call a main queue, kind of like the execution of the brain, right? And then after a few seconds, when we get the data, it will cause this closure. Now, if it's okay if you don't understand all of these things, we'll talk more about that in just a moment. But just know that this thing, it will get back the data whenever this call is successful. We will have the data inside this closure in this response. Cool? So here, let me get the JSON Dictionary. JSON Dictionary equals to our response dot result dot value, and I can cast this thing as a string to any like this. So we get the JSON Dictionary. Now, because we are doing this, why don't we test it out? Print out the JSON Dictionary, right? Print it out like that. Cool. All right, let's print that out. And all I have to do now, let me copy, go into our app delegate. Let's test it out, right? Let's test this out. In the application that finish launching with option, let's have ForecastService equals to ForecastService like this. Oops, ForecastService, which is the one below this guy, and we have to provide an API key, which is a string. So let's have that thing. I'm going to copy paste this sample URL into the app delegate like this, right? And we need this API key. So let's have that API key over here. Or you know what, you can copy that from your browser, right? So the API key, oops. Here we go, the API key. Next thing, we need to use ForecastService dot fetch or download, right? Or get current weather, right? Get current weather, and we have the latitude, which is this guy, 37 something, so a double, and then the longitude is this guy, like that. Right? So now we call this guy, and let's run the app, and hopefully we do get some data from our terminal like this, from our console. Okay, so let's see. This is terminal. It should show up in just a moment. Here we go. And it says nil. Why is it nil? Okay, let's test this thing out. Let me copy this URL from here, paste it over here. Oh, we do got some data. So why is it nil? Let's run it once again. Here we go. It's still nil. All right, so let's check our forecast.service. So it means that there's no data, right? This says nil. Why is it? Now we have the response.result.value, and we cast it as a string to any, right? So now let's debug this thing together. First thing, I'm going to print out the response, and then I'm going to print out some star like this so that we can separate this, and then we print out the response.result. Let's run the app and see how it looks like. Here we go. Alright, so number one, we got failure, error, domain, NS URL, error, domain, unsupported URL. Oh, okay. So we got some error with our URL, right? So this is we have this guy, we have the forecast base URL. Oh, all right. So you see this thing, the forecast URL over here. We have the forecast base URL, right? And if you look at the forecast base URL, which is a property of here, it is a URL optional. So when we put into our string interpolation like this, it will const the description of that guy, right? And it will be optional something. And it is not a supported URL. All I have to do now is we ungrab that thing. Cool? So now let's run the app and see how it looks like. Alright, so now because remember that error, we have the print response, it says unsupported URL. That's why I know that there's some error with the URL. Alright, here we go. We have some data. That's awesome. You see this? A bunch of data. It's really, really long. So we have a bunch of data. That's pretty awesome. It says success, and this is the error. I'm sorry, this is the data, and pretty much is the same as our data over here, right? That's really good. Okay, so that is that, my friend, the response, the JSON, and we got this. So let's delete this line. We now have that. So let's delete this testing line over here. Go back into the app delegate. We will delete this line too. So now we test that successfully. That's good. The last step, we need somehow, step number 3, we need somehow from this JSON dictionary, right? Remember this guy? We have a bunch. This is the dictionary. From this JSON dictionary, we turn that into the current weather object, and then we integrate that current weather object with our view controller. So let's do this. So we have the JSON dictionary, right? So now let's check if we do got the JSON dictionary. If we do got that, then we can continue. Otherwise, it will not work. So let's have, if this is the case of JSON dictionary, we do got that, then let's access the key, which is currently over here, currently, right? So let current weather dictionary equals to our JSON dictionary like this, and then we have to access the key currently, right? So currently like that. And again, we have to cast that as a string to any because it is a dictionary. And then we do this thing, oops, open and close, curly braces. Now we have the current weather dictionary. Right? So this is that thing. How can we turn that into a current weather object, an instance? Good job. All we have to do is to use the current weather equals to current weather, and we have an initializer that we did in the last part, weather dictionary over here. So we do current weather dictionary like that, and that's pretty darn good, right? All right, now we get the current weather object. That's good, but this thing doesn't have a return type. This thing doesn't have a return type, right? Because this guy, we need somehow, we will have to return the current weather. So should we just do return a current weather like this? And then here we return the current weather. Well, it doesn't work that way. Why is it? Well, the reason is this thing right here, this is a network call, and as I told you, the network call, it takes some moment to download the data from the web. Alright guys, the first thing, let's look at the thing that we are programming for, the phone. Or if you want to program for the watch, right? Those are the things that we want to program for. Now, if you look at the operating system, how it works is most computers, it has something we call a thread. So let's talk about thread. What is it? Now, the way that we have been programming so far, at least in our journey, is that the computers is kind of like a main, is like, what's that? A highway, right? So let me put that sticker here. Now, bear with me for my drawing, but the computer that we have been using is just like a highway, right? So the highway, we got that highway, and inside here we have a bunch of code, right? We have a bunch of code in our computers. And the way that it works is that it will execute each line of code down the stream, right? So we have, for example, here, the button was just clicked, the image is loaded, or the label is changed into some different string. So that is a thread. A thread is a stream of code that gets executed line by line down the stream, just like this. So that is a thread. But here is the problem though. Now, with a thread like this, if the computer has only one thread, right? If the computer has only one thread, then the problem is that we cannot have really complex programming applications. So for example, we have that thread here and we have some code. The first code we may have is like show, right? So let me have some thing over here. So the first code that we may have, for example, is we want to show some views, right? So we want to show some views. This thing, it has to be immediate, right? So when we execute this thing, it is immediate, right? Immediate. Now, if, for example, for our app, for our weather app, right? So let me make here so that we're not. So for our app, we want to, after we show the views, we want to download weather data, right? So we download the weather data. Now the problem with this thing though is that when we call that download weather data, again, the thread here, we just goes down the stream, right? The download weather data here, remember, that is our forecast object, right? Forecast service. Remember that is this method right here, the method right here that we are talking about. Now, this download weather data, download current weather, it is not a like a method that from top to bottom down the stream. Because why is that? Well, this download weather data, it is going to get off to the internet, right? It goes into the interweb like this. And then it says that, hey, your server, get me some data. And this is what we call a GET request. This is a GET request. Cool? Alright, so you cannot see the GET request. Here we go. See that? GET request. Now, this GET request, in other words, it says to the server that, hey, I want to have some data. Return for me some data. In other cases, we can have some other requests, like the post request, which says that, hey, I have this chunk of data, an image, a video, some text, I want to upload to your server. Here we go, right? Next thing we have is that after a few seconds, now the process of sending this request alone will take some time, maybe 1 second or maybe 1 millisecond, right? Depending on the quality of your network. And then it will also take some time for this request to go back. The server will respond to you in terms of some data, right? So here, it may return for you. Let me get something over here. Now in our app, we get that response. Remember that? The response, the object that we get from the data, that is the response, right? But the process here, it may take 1 second. It may take 2 seconds to get the data. It may take 10 seconds. Or even worse, it takes forever because the network fail. Why is it fail? Well, it may fail is because the server error. This error over here. The server fails, some errors with the server. Or it may fail because the internet connection, right? The internet connection. It may fail because of that, or it may fail because of the battery just die, or the user quits your app, right? There's a lot of problems. So what happens is that if we execute this way, if we execute just one stream of, here's when I come back to our problem here with the thread thing. Okay, so we have the thread here. Now the problem is, if we just have the data like this, one stream of execution, this is what we call an execution stream, right? One stream of execution. Then when we execute into this line, right, when we get the data, then we have to wait for 1 second, 10 seconds, 5 seconds, or forever to get the data from the web and then get back here, and then we can continue, right? So it will be step 1, for example, here we call this method. Step 2, we get to the internet and then we wait for 10 seconds. And then step 3, after 10 seconds, we get the data back and we continue with our app. What is the problem with that? The problem with that is the app will be what? Frozen. It will be literally frozen. The user cannot do anything with the app. And they will assume that your app crashes, doesn't work. So we have to fix this problem. And the way that we fix this problem is not with a single thread. It is with multi-threading. Why is it? Well, because if you look at the technology that we have in the phone, right? The phone we have, before we just have one single CPU. Now the CPU becomes bigger or smaller and smaller, but we can divide that into multi-thread, right? So we have like 4 quad core. So it means that each of these things can execute different threads. So now, seeing that problem, the engineers, they divide our computers and the phones and the watch into multi-threading environments. What it means is that we will have a thread, it's called the main thread or the main queue, the main thread, the main queue. And then, oops, you cannot see that, dang it. Here we go, the main thread and the main queue, right? See this? And then it has other threads and other queues. Now, when we comes into iOS development, Android development, or web development, things are so much easier now because most operating systems, they will do that for you. You don't have to manage these main thread and main queue. But here is the general rule, and this has to be very, very strict. And you must remember this. You must take note on this. It is incredibly important. If you violate this rule, your app will crash just so terribly. The rule is all UI code has to happen in the main thread, like this. All UI code has to happen in the main thread. And then all code that takes time to execute has to happen off the main thread. This means that you download some data. This means that you upload some data. This means that you do some like complicating drawing. This means that you do some complicated computation. Or this means that you run some like machine learning or artificial intelligence or some simulations. Right? So in our case, we download something. It means that we have to get off the main thread. So how does it work? It works just automatically in iOS and with Alamofire. So here is the sequence. Number one, we'll, for example, in our view.load, right? View.load, that is UI code. Alright? So number 2, we'll call the get current data, weather. We get the current weather. That is the second one. Now, at that time, the current weather, because when we call the Alamofire get the JSON, right? It will get off the main thread into the other thread here, into this guy. For example, that's step number 3. And then it goes into the internet like this, and then we get some data, and then it goes back some data, right? And then it goes back somewhere. Right, so it takes some 1 second, it takes some 10 seconds, it takes whatever it takes. Now, during this time, the main thread keeps going on. Right? So step number 4, immediately, it will do something else, right? It will do anything that it takes over here, right? So when we get back the data, when we get back from this method right here, right, we need a callback mechanism to get back into our execution line like this. And that we use something we call a closure. A closure like this, a closure, right? So, for example, when we get back some data, we'll get some closure called back over here into, remember that after that, we are still off the main thread into other threads over here. So we get the closure. Now inside this closure is exactly the response that you have, right? The response that you have. See that? All right. Now, for example, in just a moment, when we use in here in our view controller, we call this thing. So this response right here allows us to notify this guy that, hey, we get some data. Right? So we get some data over here. So now let's get back to our demo and we do this. Remember that our step here. Number one, we call this guy, right? This method get the current weather. It gets off the main queue. It downloads some data, right? And after it downloads it, it will return us some response, which is the current weather object. But in order to notify someone that, hey, we get some data, we need a closure. We need a closure. So let's get back into the demo and I will share with you how to do this. So in here, in our current weather, I want to have a closure as a property because it is again not a linear stream of execution anymore, so we cannot return it over here. We have to have a completion closure, and that thing, it has a argument. The type of that argument is a current weather, and I want to use optional because it can be nil, and it doesn't return anything because this thing is a function. It's literally as a function that you can pass around, right? And because we can call this thing and escape out of this method at any time, then we need to mark this thing as escaping, like this, escaping, and then the closure signature. See that? And now, after we get the current data, then we just have to call completion current weather like this. And else, if the else case over here, we will still call completion, but it is nil because if we do get the current weather dictionary, then we have this completion. Else we don't have that thing, right? That's pretty good. So that's that. Now let's move on into our main storyboard, and over here, let's connect this view controller into a class. So let's right click, new file, and then attach class. Let's call this guy current weather view controller. Put it right here, and we create this guy. Awesome. Now let me organize this code a little bit. New group. This thing is controllers, like this. New group. The view controllers is our views, and this thing is our models. So this is our model, right? Networking and some model classes. So let's go into the current weather and main storyboard. You can do that on the right. Here we go. So here, let's assign this class here into what? Our current weather view controller. Current weather view controller. And let's have this label. So let's have the label connect IBLet and action. Over here, this thing, let's call this guy CD text label. That's good. Next up, let's have this guy, which is our temperature label. And this is thing, let's have this guy. This guy, how about Fahrenheit? So we call this guy temperature scale label. And let's have the background. So let's have a background here. Background image view. It's pretty good. Awesome. Go back here. Now let's use our network service class in order to get the data. So here, let's have some properties over here called let forecast API key equals to a string. Where's the API key? Let's find out. So this is my terminal. I'm sorry, this is my thing. Copy paste this secret key. Go back here. Copy paste. Right. Next thing, let's have let our coordinate to be a tuple, because it has the latitude and the longitude. So the latitude a double and the longitude is also a double. And I will assign this to some values. And you know what? Let's use this thing. Here we go. Boom. So we just hard code this thing, and if you want to use core location to get the latitude and the longitude from the GPS, you can do that. Right, we'll talk about that. So that is the coordinate, latitude, and the longitude. That's good, right? Next thing, in the view that load over here, let's have let the forecast. Oops, by the way, let me have let or var forecast service, which is of type forecast service, like this. And then in our view that load, let's have forecast service equals to our forecast service. Oops, there you go. Forecast service with the API key of our forecast API key, like that. And then finally, we call forecast service dot get current weather data, and we have to provide the latitude, longitude. So latitude is coordinate dot let, longitude is coordinate dot long, and completion. So completion here is what is that? The completion, just press enter, and then we have the current weather like this, right? So see that? This thing in here, we can what? Yeah, we can use this current weather in our application. But before we do that, there's a problem though. There's a problem. What is the problem? Let's head over our board and I will share with you that. Alright guys, remember our drawing, right? So we are at this step right here. We are right now at this step. We have the closure. We get some data response to us. But the problem is this rule over here. The rule over here. Why? Because right now our closure takes us off the main queue. We are in other queues. But if we want to change our properties, our IB outlet and our IB actions, right? If we want to do that, we want to change the temperature label, all of those labels, it is UI code. So somehow we have to get back to the main queue. Right? So we have to jump up from the other queues into the main queue. And then after we are able to get from the main back to the main queue, we will do other things like the label text equals to the current weather something, right? So that is what we do. Because why? Because this thing is UI code, and the rule is all UI code has to happen on the main queue. And if it doesn't happen on the main queue, if it happens somewhere over here off the main queue, it will violate the rule and your app will look really crappy. Some cases it's like it doesn't respond at all. Some cases it's like nothing changes, nothing happens, or you have some weird errors. It will mess up the rules, it will mess up the programming. It has really terrible, and it's hard to figure it out. So in this case, if you test everything and everything works up until this point, and you see some errors, and if your code over here is over here, then you see some errors, very much likely it is because you didn't jump back to the main queue. Okay, so now let's go back into our demo and jump back to the main queue. To jump back to the main queue, we use something we call Grand Central Dispatch. What is it? The Grand Central Dispatch, the naming convention, it gets from a train station from New York, in New York City. It is a giant train station, and what it does is that it's just a lot of stations, a lot of trains goes into that, and it kind of like this train goes there, this train go here, and this train go there, and it's the same way. If you think of threading in the computers, it's just like a train, right? So it says that, hey, I want to get back to the main train, to the main thread. So here I'm going to use dispatch queue.main.async, which is asynchronously execute code in the main thread. And here we said, hey, if we do get the current weather, if that current weather is our current weather over here, which is this guy, right? If we do get the current weather, you know what? If we do get the current weather, then let's go back into the main thread, because otherwise, why bother, right? So here we go. Let's delete some unnecessary lines over here. And now, if we get the current weather, we get back to the main thread. Then let's check. Let temperature equals to the current weather. Current weather dot temperature. Then let's do self.temperature label.text to be a string, and then we do get the temperature like this, right? Otherwise, else we do self.temperature self.temperature label.text to be something like a dash like this, so that it is, I'm sorry, it doesn't show anything. And then, you know what? I want to have a little degree symbol. So let's hold the control command space. Again, control command space. And then you will see this was that emoji palette. And then let's search for degree. And then you see this Unicode here. Double click that, and you will see this degree symbol. See that? Alright, now that's all it takes. So now let's run the app and see how it looks like. Oh, by the way, this thing use an temperature. So let's run the app. Moment of truth after maybe 100 lines of code. Yeah, I think this thing is like, yeah, it doesn't count this. So 50, and this thing, yeah, around 100 line. Oh, we don't have over here. We changed that. What is that? Dot. So it means that does it cuts off. So let me change this thing over here. Change that over here. Remember, this thing is 58. Oh, by the way, let's have this thing center aligned. Run the app once again and see how it looks like. Here we go. Yeah, it's pretty late. 8:50 so far. So I hope that you enjoyed this training so far. And now it's 57. And it has this thing, so it should be accurate, isn't it? So let me do that thing like this. Okay, so change in your storyboard so that we make sure that we get the data and everything works. Alright, my friend, I hope that you enjoyed this training. If you do, can you do me 2 favors? Number 1, can you subscribe to the channel right here so that I can continue to deliver for you free trainings every single week on the channel right here, and we build a community so that you can rise with us. Number 2, what I love to do for you is I have another training, as I told you in the beginning of this session, is I have another training called how to build and design the Nike e-commerce store using Firebase and iOS and Swift without having to hire a $10,000 developer and designer. So I would love to give that training for you for free to just have in the game and build a world-class e-commerce store, retail store. So if you love to have that, just click the link on this post, go there and download that. Just enter your name and email there. I will be happy to send you that training for free. So go there, download the training. I cannot wait to see you in the training. As always, my friend, go out there every single day of your life, learn new things, craft your ideas, and contribute to the world. I see you in the Nike e-commerce training.